and our hope. Amen. That's great, Robin. You got us to answer a question, but where are you going with it? Did it feel like that at the Learning Together? I asked who you thought Jesus was. I put some stuff on a flip chart, and I kind of left it hanging. Just a little bit, didn't I? Oh, because there's more. Now I get to answer the question. So there's a lot more. There could be a lot more. I'll try to be as succinct as Peter. The thing is, what happens in the story is that we hear that Jesus asks the disciples, they're walking, he asks the disciples, who do people say that I am? That's a pretty easy question. They have an answer right away. It does say they kind of answer collectively in Mark's account, but they have an answer. And then he says, who do you say? Then he says, who do you say that I am? 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 We don't know how he asks the question is the thing, right? But then he says a bunch of other stuff after Peter answers. That's the thing sometimes about stories of Jesus is we have no detail. I wonder in this story, particularly, who's he looking at when he asks the question? I used to have this horrifying experience when I was in choir. A long time ago. I have this horrifying, if you've ever been in a choir, you know the number one thing that a conductor always says to you is, watch. Right? Watch the conductor so you can see what's going on and you know what the tempo is and all that important stuff. Watch the conductor. They're always saying, watch the conductor. And I'd be watching the conductor and I would see that the conductor was seeing that and I was thinking, why are you telling me that? And finally, one of the choirs I was in, I went to the conductor and I said, I am watching you. You see that I'm watching you. Why do you keep saying, watch? And he said, it's because you're the only one who is. Right? He's trying to make eye contact, and no one's watching, except one person who is. Where's he going to go? He's going to go to the person who's watching, so you can make eye contact. So when Jesus asks this question, who's he looking at? Is he looking at anyone in particular? Is he he's just asked the group, and they answered what everyone else thinks. Is he asking the group? You know he isn't, because if he was asking the group, they would have struck a committee that would have had subcommittees that would have considered various parts of the question, submitted their comments, so that they could create a statement that would have been forwarded to the larger group for approval. He's asking them individually. And that's the part where, again, it doesn't say anything, but I imagine that a few of them kind of went, don't call on me, don't call on me, don't ask me. Some shuffling, occasional cough maybe. But then Peter says, you're the Messiah. And Jesus goes, good answer, and they all high-five him. Except they don't. It doesn't actually say how Jesus responds to that answer, other than to then start talking about what's going to happen. Which, oddly enough, who doesn't like that answer? Peter, the one who said you're the Messiah. So, is the Messiah the right answer? No one wants to answer that question, do you? Well, yes, of course it's the right answer, because if Jesus was asking them individually and Peter answered honestly, there isn't a wrong answer. The question is, who do you say that I am? And if you truly believe that I'm Messiah and your answer is Messiah, that's the right answer. The thing is, I suspect one of the reasons that Jesus goes on to say what he says is because he knows that when Peter says Messiah, Peter's idea of what the Messiah is and what Jesus is may not be the same thing. Remember, we're always usually talking about this around Christmas time. What kind of Messiah were the people expecting? And the general consensus is that we think the Messiah they were expecting was a great king who would have an army, who would overthrow the Romans, restore Israel to its glory. And that is not what they got with Jesus. So even if Peter answers that question correctly for himself, that may not be what Jesus is. So Jesus goes on to talk about what that is, and then Peter says, you got to stop saying stuff like that. It scares people off, you know. It wasn't what Peter wanted to hear. So, when you think about the question, and when I think about the question, who is Jesus? Who am I going to say Jesus is? For me, there's no wrong answer. In fact, my answer is going to change on a fairly regular basis, I suspect. So is yours, because we're all human, we're alive, and we grow, right? I'll talk about how we do that in just a second. But the thing is, Peter answers Messiah. And so for 2,000 years, we've collectively tried to figure out what that means. And we've made various statements. We have different denominations of the church have statements about who they think Jesus is, who God is, what we believe around that. We have our communal statements in response to a question that is asked very personally. And that's great. That's great as long as communities of faith, we recognize that we're individuals. And so we are seeking our relationship with God not only as a community, but also as individuals. What brings us together communally is the opportunity to share that and to discuss that and to figure out the things that help us all share in that. So, my answer to the question, who is Jesus? Who do I say Jesus is today, I'm going to say Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. Because I think that's the point of Jesus, is God with us, so that we each will come to understand that God is with us, that God is in us. I think that's the point of Jesus. I think that's the point of Jesus, to bring us to the realization that we too are divine and human. We're not just human, we are also divine. Read Genesis, we're created in the spirit of God and of the earth, right? In the image of God, but of the earth. We too are divine and human. And the thing about Jesus is that he shows us how those two things work together. Truly. And just as importantly, shows us we too are capable of that. It's really, and this is the hard part, right? Is it's really easy to go, you are Jesus. And really hard to go, this is me putting my arm around Jesus. You are Jesus. It's really easy to acknowledge the miracles as the power of God, as something that's distant and powerful that acts on us, but harder to see those miracles as an opportunity to understand that we too are capable of that, because we too are divine and human. And that's the thing about communal understandings of God too, right? Is that we can, and I have always loved this language, and I know there's lots of issues around it for lots of people, but I've always loved this language about being a minister in the United Church. In order to be a minister of the United Church, they are going to ask you two questions. One involves a pension plan. We don't need to discuss that. The other, and we really don't, I don't know if you got the news, Alan, but anyway, the other, which is more important, is you must be in essential agreement with the basis of union. Essential agreement. It doesn't say you have to subscribe to it. You have to literally, essential agreement, which allows for the fact that your understanding of it, being yours, allows you to be in agreement, essentially. You may have issues with some things, like language and things, but you can be in essential agreement. That's at least how I understand it. I think I'm safe saying that. Okay. And that's our thing about being a community. Again, it's not just about how we might fit in or feel like we belong. It's what we bring to it as well, right? What we contribute to the community as a whole. So even as a community of faith, when we contribute our personal relationship with God as part of the community's relationship with God, that's how we know God. That's how we know Jesus. I think that's, again, part of what Jesus is about. God with us. I ran across, I would have honestly would have put this on a slide, but I just ran across it last night. Roger Woolsey, who's the author of a book called Kissing Fish, Christianity for People Who Don't Like Christianity. I'll just leave that hanging. He wrote this short poem, which he posted on his social media, and it goes like this. No longer can I fake it. No longer can I pretend. No longer can I fool myself and others when I say God. I mean what they think I'm supposed to mean. I'll just say that again. No longer can I fake it. No longer can I pretend. No longer can I fool myself and others when I say God. I mean what they think I'm supposed to mean. Let's revisit the flip chart here for a second. When I ask you, who do you say that Jesus is? Do you answer from the heart who you believe Jesus is for you? Or do you answer with the answer that is appropriate to this community of faith? Because that'd be another question I'd be asking Peter in that moment. Who do you say that I am? There's silence. They're all a little bit nervous about giving their answer because it's a personal answer. And Peter blurts out, or says emphatically, we don't really know, you're the Messiah. I'm not one of the 12, but I'm standing off to one side and I'm thinking to myself, what do you mean by that? And then Jesus goes on to talk about this other stuff and Peter tries to stop him. And again, I'm not one of the 12, but I'm standing off to the side and I'm thinking, okay, so wait a minute. Was Messiah the right answer? Or was that the one that Peter thought he was supposed to give? What is the right answer? Well, the right answer, again, is how you personally know Jesus. And the thing is, if you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about that, first of all, you should. But secondly, feel free to answer with, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about that, but I'll get back to you. How different would this story be if Jesus had asked, who do you say that I am? And none of them answered. And then finally one of them said, I don't know. How would Jesus have answered that? With that same period of dead silence. We could have had crickets there for a minute. But that's the thing. That's all part of this is we need to be able to give an answer. We need to know about our relationship. And we need to know also that because we're alive and we grow, that might change. And we should be open to the possibility of that. For me today, and I realize that's a really broad answer, and I could talk for several more hours, I won't, about what I mean by Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. I could talk more about the whole idea of we are divine and human, and Jesus tries to reconnect us with the divine part. I mean, we have enough trouble trying to be human, and here's Jesus trying to connect us with the divine part and bring us back into our relationship with God through that, and our relationship with each other, too. Particularly if you're somebody who's going to answer that Jesus for you is say, love, or joy, or laughter, teacher, friend. I love the one about the universe. How else will we connect with that? other than through the way we build relationships through our humanity and our divinity, through the Spirit, as well as through our individual sort of human relationships. So I'm sorry, I meant to say, my answer has two parts. My answer that Jesus is Emmanuel is just part one. And don't worry, the second part doesn't take several hours. Well, it could, because part two is, please tell me what you think, what you feel, what you know in answer to that question. Tell me how you know Jesus, who you say Jesus is. Use whatever language you are comfortable with. Use God language if you like. Don't if you want to. And tell me who Jesus is for you. Share that. Because then I'll know, won't I? I'll know what others in this great oneness that is the family of God feel and believe and think. Maybe that will help me to know more. Maybe it will help me to reflect on my relationship with Jesus and with God. Maybe it will also help me understand that part of my relationship with Jesus and with God is knowing that that divine Spirit is in all of us, and that is the basis for a relationship. That's a great thing about communities of faith, is that we get to share not only in the things that all of us find meaningful, but in hearing things that individuals find meaningful. And sometimes we also spend some time thinking about not just what Jesus means to us, but what you might think or feel or know you mean to Jesus and to God. That you are loved unconditionally. That you are part of this sort of great, not even just the family of Jesus, but the family of all creation. Right? From the very beginning, the Spirit of God is in all things that are created. The great thing about that story is that the Spirit of God inspires all things. That's whether you call that love, the energy of the universe, whatever you want to call it. It is in all living things. So we are not just about being the family of humanity that is the family of Jesus, but the whole family of creation. How do you know Jesus? Who do you say Jesus is? There are so many answers to that question. We can't always afford to be as succinct as Peter in the story with one word. We can't always just be one word on a flip chart. Sometimes we need to consider all of these. Sometimes we need to consider that our voice contributes to how we all know Jesus, how we all know God. And it's not just our voice either, is it? It's in how we live. Because it's not just words. Who do you say? So, are you only going to say with words? Or are you going to say that in your life too? Because that too is part of knowing Jesus, is knowing that it's not just about the words that we hear Jesus say in the stories. It's not just about the stories Jesus tells. It's understanding what they mean in our lives, taking them into our lives, sharing them with others, and living into that awareness of Jesus and of God.